Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this week's Fake Accents Unite. I'm joined this week by the Britisher. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
And by daughter of Albion, Sarathustra, Sarah. Good evening.
Good evening.
You're just going to accumulate more and more titles as we go on, aren't you, Sarah?
It sounded good that you forgot lady.
Lady, master, mistress of all the beasts of the land.
Master.
Also, or as he is also widely known, the Bunny Girl.
Bunny
or
girl.
lewd bunny, as I've been told that she's known on V's streams.
News to me.
But there we go. Yes, good evening.
Would that be regarding anything you've said on V streams?
Undoubtedly, 90% I would have thought of what I've said on these.
I heard there's an interesting GIF going around about V just recently. I don't know.
I don't know where that's come from. No.
No idea.
What is this GIF of? Because I'm not aware of it.
Oh, it's just one of those GIFs where his logo is on with the sort of dark hooded creature, and then the lighting just slightly changes and then changes back into the.
Is it a meerkat related?
It's something meerkat related. Yes, yeah. It's strange that you should say that. Yes.
Okay.
See, I've already got one of those giggles out of her, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh,
yes, we do like the giggler. Is another title.
That's annoying, isn't it?
The Sitsgoen has already donated 20 Danish kroner. Thank you very much. Says burn Brussels, remove the Reich. Owen first. So always.
Yes, but those are his kind of Viking genes coming to the fore, aren't they?
What we don't realise is he can't actually help himself from saying this sort of thing. And in fact, it's such a strong compulsion now. It's so ingrained in his being that it has to be big and brash and pasted into super chat.
Yes,
so
if it wouldn't be Brussels, he would be opting to burn New York or something like that.
Well, he is also saying
pillage Tokyo, something of that nature.
He's also claiming that he's going to raid us in future, which just seems to be more of his vibe.
There's no pillaging without rape with that lot, though. Just saying.
I did watch, what was it, David Mitchell talking about the origins of like the phrase rape and pillage. And everyone goes, he's talking about how from a sort of an enunciation point of view, from the vocabulary standpoint, it's quite a nice phrase to say. It's quite enjoyable. It just rolls off the tongue and completely detaches you from the horror of what the actions actually mean.
Sounds like a good night out, really.
Oh dear! It's just like,
but doesn't it normally come in a sort of in a triad? Isn't it rape, burn, and pillage?
Oh, I don't know. I haven't done much of the three, so I can't say that.
But basically, there also has to be the burn in there. So
the Britishers' life lessons. If you're going to rape someone, make sure to burn and pillage everything first.
Indeed.
Yes, yeah,
and that sort of thing. There we go.
If you want a job done, do it properly.
Speaking of jobs done properly, Tailed Feature is meant to be on this stream. However, he's fighting a dragon at the moment. It's called a boiler, and it happens to be in his cellar. So, unfortunately, he's got to fix that before he can join us. But
That's a good segue from burn to boiler.
Oh, you know it. But I'm assured that he will join us eventually, provided he can sort that out, in case people are wondering where he is. Joe Neverton's donated £2. Thank you, sir. Says, leave my Lindisfarne alone, you blasted Scandies.
I second that.
We second that, yes. And third. What was I going to say? Yes, the topic for this evening, I decided it was going to be completely non-political after the many political things that we have ended up talking about on Fake Accents Unite. And I thought we'd go a bit more back to the roots and we talk about something sort of what is quintessentially British, what is British culture, what are British values, and so on. I admit I may have been reading and listening to a little bit of Roger Scruton in the run-up to this, given his great love of aesthetic.
He's the right one to be listening to, that's for sure.
He is. Binary Surfer says, is Tailed Feature's surname Fritzl?
Oh, Jesus Christ.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, apart from the rape and pillage talk, is exactly how you get demonetized on YouTube. Thank you very much for that, sir. Britisher, of course, has to watch out for this because now he has.
I am now officially a communist.
You are a communist. I sent him a message directly afterwards with nothing in it other than the word "commie," because he deserves that. And I hope that whoever sends him...
You're sending me a message saying communist dot is effectively was in reaction to my having officially declared myself a communist.
Oh, not really.
So you were actually just following on from that.
Oh, of course. Whatever. What I'm trying to say is that when Britisher enables his super chat for the first time and we run to the next Cyberpass quiz, say, someone should send him a super chat, and his first super chat should call him a communist. It's as simple as that.
I agree. By the way, there should be a Christmas Cyberpass quiz. I've decided.
Yeah, I am actually playing with that idea. Yes, I'm playing with the idea of doing a Christmas Cyberpass quiz.
We should force Sargon and Dankula at gunpoint to attend.
But it's always a matter of kind of, getting the questions together in time and whatever.
Yeah. YouTube is work. We get it, British.
And it's also then a matter of kind of remembering to get in touch with people before your connection fails, which has also happened to me recently. So yeah, it's not always that straightforward.
Oh my God, you're such a drama queen.
I know, it's terrible.
Melodramatic.
I have got the back of my hand to my forehead right now. I'm doing the pose and everything.
Are you saying, Britisher, that when it comes to the Cyberpass quiz, you are sitting on the fence?
Well, I have to remain true to my nature and sit on the fence on one or two things, because from what I've been saying about libertarians recently, I mean, one can hardly accuse me of sitting on the fence in that sphere.
Sutzgoen has responded to Joe Neverton now, saying nonsense to the idea of leaving my Lindisfarne alone. Nonsense. I can also scream vividly about cleaving the helmets of the Goth and splattering his brains like Christian IV. I only seek to liberate you from your oppressive wealth.
Jeez.
I tell you, he gets ever more violent. I think he's been on a little bit of the Christmas mead, of course, it being that sort of time. But there we go.
Quite understandable.
Mm-hmm. Good evening, Tailed Feature. You survived your encounter with the violent boiler, then?
Yes, it seems to be operational once more.
Well, was it the boiler that was violent, or was it your methods of persuasion towards the boiler that were violent?
No comment. I may have said a few violent epithets while I was fixing it. Yeah,
fixing it in the broadest terms, of course.
Well, it's still under warranty, so it's only been in a week and it's already broken. So I'm quite annoyed.
And the mallet being a fairly universal tool.
No, I didn't actually use any implements, just my fists.
This is this quality Scottish engineering that you get up there. It's not necessarily that the boiler is poorly made, just that everything that is built that goes to Scotland inevitably breaks much quicker. It's like a paradox or an anomaly.
Then again, it must be pointed out that the wilds of Scotland are not necessarily a place where you would wish your boiler to break down in December.
Especially not right before Christmas as well.
No.
But is it working now?
It seems to be. I think there must be a leak somewhere there because the pressure keeps dropping.
Let's see.
That's the sort of exciting conversations that I have with people.
We have the Battle of the Boiler Room, and meanwhile Joe Neverton claiming that the Battle of Copenhagen will commence again after his clash with the Scandinavian. Basically, what we're seeing is sort of Brexit negotiations.
The Battle of Copenhagen. We won that, didn't we?
Yes. Well, yeah. Joe Neverton does want to win. But
he's paying in British pounds, so he must be of our stock.
Have we got any one-eyed admirals we can send?
No, but I'll take your eye if you like, Britisher, and you can go over there again.
Oh, too kind.
I just keep...
You're always helpful with these kind of suggestions.
Yeah. In fact, it's not about taking your eye. It's more like giving you one back, given that you're a brain in a jar. I could put you on your brass automaton, and off you go. But there we go. So let's go
You're, you're beginning to kind of paint me as the kind of Terminator with a kind of glass jar attachment.
Well, you did call yourself the Britishator, but
Did I?
obviously the Britisher being the condensed form of that. So Scohen has responded, just don't do it like the Swedes and sink right away. He's just trying to bring the Swedes into this.
Yes, I think he's alluding to the Vasa, which was their flagship, which on launch sunk.
Which side?
Yes.
Which side were you on in that particular conflict, Britisher?
I was the one who had opened all the portholes.
I see. Just you like to take sort of more surreptitious, sort of on the side, but still contributing style roles, don't you?
Yes, indeed. Yes.
But there's that. Oh dear, I love this stream genuinely. So
I'm the one who kind of, he's on the side. He contributes to, in a minor role to sort of historical events, and then puts his own spin on it, so that when Admiral Lord Nelson at the Battle of Trafalgar demands the message be hoisted, and it's supposed to read "Britain expects," I'm the one that makes sure that it reads "England expects," just for posterity's sake.
I'm not taking the bait.
Not having that.
So to come on to our main topic of the evening, I want to basically get us to try and define what British values are.
Try to define the indefinable, to
define
square circle.
Basically, and or to at least come up with sort of something prominent within Britain that sort of sets it apart, that you could conceivably derive values from, even if it's not
alcoholism.
What's that now?
Rampant alcoholism.
Rampant.
No, those are Russian values.
Well, binge Britain, Magaluf exists. We do like moving to. What was it? There was that story a couple of years ago about that girl who decided that she would perform 15 oral sex acts for a holiday, and it turned out that a holiday was a cocktail being served at the bar. So after all of that, she didn't get a holiday; she got a holiday. Unfortunately for her.
Ice.
With ice, yes. Extra ice.
Somewhat ironic that the drink being served would be a cocktail.
Yes.
I don't think that passed over anyone else's head.
No. You just have to bring it down to that kind of base level Britisher as you always do. Honestly,
I always aim for the lowest common denominator.
Working class trash that you are. I mean, what? I am a friend of the working man, as academic agent would say. And to those people,
Vox populi, vox Dei. Yes.
As people may have been saying in the chat, I'm also not an ANCAP now. And for those of you who don't know, my guests included, I did go on a stream last night with AA. Apparently on his side, although I didn't know this until I got into the stream, where he was talking about whether or not he was an ANCAP, basically trying to defend that he wasn't. To which many of the people in chat said, I got lovely messages like, not so obvious is an idiot and so far out of his depth. Also, the academic agent clearly wants to lose this debate. And other such niceties as you go on, and by the end we had naturally reached no resolution to the question, but it was more. There were some interesting problems, but I think perhaps I needed to do a little bit more reading. But I'm certainly not an ANCAP at this point. And yes, there was a great meme about the Car King, and so if you're familiar with Evil Dead, there was all hail the Car King baby, became a meme in the Discord. And heroin,
take your word for it.
And
yes.
Heroin burgers as well, because AA developed a restaurant called Heroin Burger.
That is cultural appropriation of my people.
that is the business end version of his trying to rap, isn't it?
Everyone's waiting for your rap response, by the way, Britisher.
Well,
Right.
then they'll just have to keep waiting, won't they?
Could you recite some self-authored poetry at some point, and then someone could put another rap track behind it and claim that it's this track? Because do you remember your what was it, Tommy? I can't remember the name of the poem now that you read.
Tommy Robinson, oi, oi.
Not Tommy Robinson.
Oh yes, yeah, that's a well-known track.
But
of mine, yeah.
the Britisher came up with the chant in the first place, don't you know?
I believe so. Yeah, it might have been a fever dream, but I distinctly remember the Britisher going on about Tommy.
Tommy Robinson in 5 cantos.
Of course, you.
Someone needs to
Well, I
write.
mean, I did actually once recite Scotland the Brave, only for the needle to scratch off the record when it became clear that Count Dankler had been found guilty.
Oof.
There was that track, yes.
Dear. But I do know, because I remember one of the members of AA's Discord did put a rap track behind one of your utterances. And,
yes, I do recall there was such a thing once. Yes,
it was played almost daily in the music channel in there until people got so sick of it that rap itself was banned.
Well, that's progress then, isn't it?
Occasionally it comes back. But there we go. Bag of Tea says, "Tell the Britisher I didn't do that response to AA to excuse his replying." Yes. Tea Bag, or Bag of Tea as he has changed his name to now, clearly because the fame has got to him and he needed to obfuscate his name, did a rather interesting rap response to Sly Sneak, which is on that channel now.
Yeah, I mean, it's only a matter of time until his evolution continues and he becomes known as the artist formerly known as Bag of Tea. Yes.
The hills are alive with the sound of "Hey Tommy Tommy," says Davey. And we've had a couple more
Not
super
a poem.
The Anglo-Scandinavian War continues. Joe Neverton saying Alfred the Great did nothing wrong. And Sutskoen replying, "We'll defeat the Brits by talking offensively at them." I think that may be
we will cave at that, I think.
So winning strategy, that one.
At least our political class will. You can't say those things. Arrest that man.
Hate speech.
Yeah. He asked for a gingerbread man instead of a gingerbread person. I'm offended.
Oh, that's the thing at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, it is in Scotland.
But if you remember our last episode, which had a sort of Christmassy theme, we had the striped candy canes, wasn't it? Which Jesus canes, yes. And the long list of banned items, including but the accepted items being gingerbread men, gingerbread women, and gingerbread persons.
The non-binary ginger
people.
I'm just trying to work out if King Alfred did nothing wrong. Did King Aila?
Well, I'm sure that's a question that they'll have to answer.
They'll definitely have to think about that, won't they? We'll leave it to them.
So, I was discussing / thinking about this British values question, and I was having a chat to some people who aren't British to see how they sort of perceived the British when they've lived here.
So you thought you would get there by first eliminating all the wrong answers by asking foreigners. Yes.
Well, to be fair, intelligent foreigners. And the thing that we came up with was one of the things was respecting other cultures.
Ugh.
Right? No, not right. No, but this person is not a culture warrior. They're not they're not meaning this in a social justicey kind of.
Well, yes, but you said they were an intelligent foreigner, which by their mere nature means they're scheming.
Not that you're biased or anything. You were raised on
otherizing.
Well, I think we could otherize the Britisher, given he was raised on the continent, and arguably a case could be made that he's not actually British.
Was he even born here?
No, that is the question.
I can confess I was born in England.
All right, Obama. Let's see the
Oh, Britisher?
That is
or-
about as much as I'll let on to. Yes.
Yes, you still won't reveal where you live. I maintain you probably live on one of the islands, given how difficult it is to get you to meet up at some point.
Well,
But,
you know, I'm the one in the third hollowed out volcano on the right on the island of St. Kilda. Yes.
Dear.
Got
Binary,
Wi-Fi.
binary surfer referring to the
They
gingerbread.
are right now Googling St. Kilda feverishly.
But binary surfer, in response to the gingerbread controversy, says, "I wouldn't even bake you, gingerbread Z."
Cute.
Strong. But no. So I think that respect for other cultures is actually a British value, and not just sort of a London centric thing either. I think most Britons are certainly respectful of other cultures. And want to learn things and take things from other cultures, coming with the caveat, of course, that they also want to be able to reject things they don't like. So
In
Brits
theory.
can appreciate Indian religious practice, cuisine, and art without wanting the caste system, for instance,
Or widow burning.
or
Yes.
widow burning. And I don't think it's particularly London centric either. You know, much as people or particularly people on the left will malign sort of rural Britain as some kind of cast off racist countryside. So, but I was thinking about this sort of from a historical perspective, and I don't think particularly that the British Empire destroyed all that many cultural practices that were beneficial. Do you know what I'm saying? You would be better disposed to address that, Britisher, given the nature of
Well, I
your
mean, I guess it depends
historic.
on how highly you value the thuggies.
The what now?
The thuggies.
I
It's
mean,
where we get the word thug from.
mhm.
The thuggies were a sect that basically preyed on travelers in India. And they are believed to, over the years, killed thousands and thousands of people. And eventually the British cottoned on to what was going on and hunted them down and did away with them.
Mm.
And I believe it was some sort of religious practice. It could, in fact, be what was it? Indiana Jones' Temple of Doom might have been sort of slightly based on, if you know what I mean.
Right. I don't. But when I'm talking about this, it's like when I think about the places which Britain invaded, and colonized, etc. There aren't that many stories that I can think of, or there aren't any stories I can think of rather, of the British sort of forcing British culinary tradition, for instance, on
The Chinese
their
lady made it
subjects.
better.
Well, I'm not saying that they made it better. I'm saying that they incorporated the native food into their own diet at the same time as, for instance. And then, obviously they applied certain British traditions, such as roads, infrastructure, the legal system, and that sort of thing. But I don't think that they destroyed more than they could get
I
away
think
with.
what you're trying to say is that overall they were kind of a benign influence. It doesn't mean that they were perfect and didn't do any damage whatsoever.
No.
But as such, they didn't go in there with the attitude of let's just go kill and pillage.
Or even let's make this little England out here, right?
Or let's move in and just enslave everyone.
Yeah.
Indeed, they moved in and unenslaved quite substantially.
In a lot of yes, as soon as the abolition, the Navy did a very good job,
Mm-hmm.
in particular with that. People are shocked that you watched the Temple of Doom, by the way, Britisher.
I was a bit surprised by it.
Well,
Yeah.
one has to take in some cultural influences.
Well,
And,
one
the
gets.
Temple of Doom. That's about as far as I'm willing to stretch.
I mean,
Well,
if you're asking me to watch superheroes, that's when it kind of where it ends for me.
One presupposes that
Gentlemen in tight pants punching each other is not really something that I'm interested in.
But people doubt. Yeah. we predispose that you end your days typically sitting in your armchair to relax, watching endless reruns of Porridge.
Yes, I can in fact binge on sitcoms like that. Yes, I have been known to just basically have Yes Minister on again and again and again and again, or Porridge, or To the Manor Born, which is a very underrated sitcom, I might add. Which of course everybody will immediately say, oh well, it just proves how posh he is. But no, To the Manor Born is something I can only highly recommend.
So it's going saying, obviously the Britisher watched Temple of Doom. He told Lucas to make it.
Well, there was that. Yes, he stole that idea from me.
Of course.
He saw it as the Temple of Doom is actually a Renaissance play.
Lord Pterodact says...
It was one of Dante's lost folios, was it?
There's actually 10 circles of hell. Lord Pterodact says, Google the tradition of Marie-Louise. I butchered that pronunciation, but I'll have a look at...
Very well.
There is a song associated with this. It is a folk custom in South Wales. Tradition entails the use of a hobby horse made from a horse's skull mounted on a pole and carried by an individual hidden under a sackcloth. It represents...
This sounds sufficiently pagan to be interesting.
It does, yes. It represents a regional variation of a hooded animal tradition that appeared in various forms throughout Great Britain from about 1800. It was traditionally performed at Christmas time by groups of men who would form into teams to accompany the horse, this dead horse's skull, on its travels around the local area. And although the makeup of such groups varied, they typically included an individual to carry the horse, a leader, and stock characters such as Punch and Judy. The team would carry the Marie-Louise. How do you pronounce this?
I can't see it. Where is it?
Marilwyd.
I'm surprised there's only one L, to be honest.
It's not chle.
But I'll ask my Welsh friend. I'll do it now.
But in any case, the team would carry this horse to local houses where they would request entry through the medium of song. The householders would be expected to deny them entry, again through song, and the two sides would continue their responses to one another in this manner. If the householders eventually relented, then a team would be permitted entry and given food and drink. So you get this sort of hollering in verse, back and forth, like, oh yes we will, oh no you won't, and until one side gets bored and then lets the other in, or not, as the case may be. The term apparently meant Holy Mary and was a reference to Mother of Jesus. Yep, a dead horse's skull under a sackcloth.
If people sort of wonder why the British took to organizing mass sport events and things like that, it is because more than likely we would have otherwise died of boredom, because we would have been standing outside houses with horse skulls hollering at the, so chances are that's how the cup final came about, ladies and gentlemen.
I tell you that the horse skull business was booming back then. That's what it was. It's revealed preference.
Talking of horses, has anybody seen some of the imagery that's been on the news these last few days? I think AP McCoy got involved and whatever in the Shetland Pony Grand National that's about to be held.
Oh, wonderful day! I want to see this.
Yeah, apparently the Shetland Pony Grand National is coming up.
Oh.
And of course, with them being Shetland ponies, they're obviously tiny. So they're obviously ridden. They're ridden by little boys who want to become jockeys.
I have. Let me get these photos up.
And AP McCoy, who obviously is the world famous champion jockey, he was there giving them advice as to how to best go at it. Yes.
Here they are. These little Shetland ponies, ridden as they were.
Yeah, I'll claim that one for having brought up this story. Yes.
There we are. As they leap.
Oh, they're adorable. They're so chubby.
Yes, when you see them in motion, it looks as cute. It looks even cuter than it does in stills.
Oh, let's see some video.
I would put video up, but this would immediately be banned for copyright violation. unfortunately.
Running straight
it's something. It's something to Google later once the stream is over. The Shetland Pony Grand National. Yes.
I'll see.
Running straight to the Findus factory.
I'll see if we have we got. Yes, here's a GIF.
Was that too working class a joke? Was it?
Well, for me, I didn't get it.
I can't imagine any of you have had a Findus frozen lasagna before.
Oh dear.
A frozen lasagna.
Yeah, remember the horse meat scandal? No.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not exactly topical. I realise that.
There we go.
You sound like you're well acquainted with it, though.
Oh, I lived on frozen meals for a while. Yeah.
Let's see.
I assume you defrosted them first.
Well, then again, if your boiler breaks down, you may have to again.
Oh,
I won't be able to unfreeze them because it's too cold.
Well, they will literally be frozen meals.
Joe Neverton has responded to you, Britisher, saying Ella was okay, but Egbert of Wessex was better. So there's that side of things. Sitskoen asks, why are they sitting on the dinner? Is it clearly referring to the Shetland ponies there?
Oh,
See, that was another horse meat scandal joke. There we go.
There you go.
Not as good as that.
They're growing in number, yes.
Does they get baby miniature horses as well, micro horses?
They're not Kobe horses, so no one's going to eat them.
What's Kobe?
Sounds tasty.
Kobe beef is supposedly the highest quality beef in the world.
Yes, but they're not horses.
No, they're not.
Yeah,
they're cows. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh.
So Kobe horses. We don't quite. I think everybody is struggling with how you made the leap from Shetland ponies to Kobe horses to Kobe beef.
No, for goodness sake, Britisher, follow along. I'm saying that Scowen said, why are they sitting on the dinner? We were like, horse meat. And then I said, well, the reason why they're not dinner is because they're not Kobe horses, which would be little... I'm saying it, high quality beef. Oh, never mind. I don't think cows are horses.
Let's return to the issue of British values.
But the little horses.
No, Sarah. We can look at little horses later.
Well, I mean, that does also play into British values to a certain extent, because why was it the British who felt the need to create all these sporting events, including such things as the Shetland Grand National?
For aesthetic beauty and adorableness?
Well, yes, but there does seem to be something about the British that seems to have driven them to create, everything from rugby to cricket to, you name it.
It must be one of our unconscious biases.
Whereas the rest of the world just seems to have kind of decided which of the British sports they want to adopt.
Yeah, they sort of took the wheat from the chaff, I think, somewhat.
Well, was it? Although some of them are more successful at it than others. For instance, India decided they wanted cricket.
Oh, I know.
I can't remember.
Yes, but for some reason, the Indians then claim that they actually invented it.
Oh, really?
Yes, even though what it actually is that they claim to have originally played before that bears no resemblance to cricket.
Seems like they're confused. It's probably something to do with the caste system,
Well, no, I think it's one of those sort of national pride things, basically not wanting to accept that perhaps your colonizer did, after all, introduce one or two things that you liked.
Slim Jim Pui has said that sports stopped people killing each other, which might actually be a reasonable explanation.
Well, yes, but it means that the British must have had a greater inclination to kill each other, or that the foreigners must all have, for a much longer time, continued killing each other until the British introduced them to their sports.
Have you ever seen Hadrian's Wall? We were terrible at keeping each other out.
It's not very high.
Exactly.
Well, yes, but Hadrian's Wall, that was an Italian contractor.
Contractor, I enjoyed it.
Oh dear. So back to British values in general, other than sport being one of them.
British is right there. There's something about the eccentricity, I think, of just bonkers things.
Well, yeah,
cheese rolling.
Yes, in Gloucester.
Wellington, everything in the Highland Games The Wellington boot toss.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, then there is also
Wellington
isn't there that little village somewhere? Sort of isn't it close to the Welsh border? I'm not sure. And they are the ones who basically continued the Olympic tradition.
Oh right.
And it was actually the Frenchman whose name I immediately can't think of right now because he's French, who then basically created the modern Olympics. He himself had been invited to that particular local little Olympics, so to speak, only a few years earlier.
You're just
I
full of
didn't know
interesting anecdotes, British.
Yeah, but I wouldn't know if they were true or not. I think someone needs to be constantly fact checking.
Yes.
Well, no, it's actually. I think it was was it a local priest who basically ran it, and I think they still do it today.
You're asking us as if we know.
And they are they're kind of really strange sports events, so to speak. So it's nothing that you would immediately recognize. But it was then basically seen as, oh well, this is an interesting idea. This kind of the idea of the community coming together and having these kind of sporting competitions. And it had by that time, I think, been run for some years. And I believe it was some clergyman that kind of oversaw the whole thing. And eventually, they had sort of people coming to look at it from all over the world, and one of them was the one who then eventually went on to found the modern Olympics. And I believe the modern Olympics should actually have, one of the organizers should have been that chap.
It's not
but I think
Pierre de Coubertin, is it?
Well, yes, that Monsieur Coubertin is the Frenchman whose name, for some reason, I can't remember. But the actual clergyman chap, I think he died before the modern Olympics were eventually started. Otherwise, he would have been part of it.
British fact check, get on this case right now. We need to find out this person's name and if they actually existed, or whether he's simply a fevered dream from the British's diseased mind.
Well, yes, I make all these things up.
Fevered mind.
So Scone has decided that he's going to stoke incredible controversy alongside Teabag by asking, does Die Hard is a Christmas movie count as a political discussion? I believe it's cultural acknowledgement of the harder times in the North. I suppose I've given enough now. Thank you very much. He always scares me when, or not scares me. My heart always has a nice little jump whenever I get a super chat which sticks around at the top. It was also a super chat with the number 100 in it, which also made me very excited for a second, until I realised it was 100 Danish kroner, which is about £8, which is very much appreciated. But always gives me a start. Joan Everton saying, I worked with horses Shetland kept bullying shires.
That's so big.
So there we go. If I just may interrupt.
Of course.
The Wenlock Games, also known as a run by the Wenlock Olympian Society, that was run by Dr. William Penny Brooks. And if you remember, I believe it wasn't the mascot for the London Olympics called Wenlock.
That's right. It was like this one-eyed thing. Yes.
So yes, the Wenlock Games. And I believe they're still held. They're still held these days. And so that is basically at the heart of the beginnings of the modern Olympic movement. So you asked me to check it, so yes, I did, and it is there. Yes. So moving on.
All right.
Is Die Hard a Christmas movie, British?
Of course it isn't.
Of course. How many different explanations have you had?
Who made you school mum of the debate?
Who, Britisher?
Yeah.
Okay. Just going. Britisher has had this. Have you been following this discussion on Twitter, Sarah, at all?
I think I may have initiated it, but posting a picture of a homemade Die Hard bulbul. And then I just muted it eventually because it was getting onto 50 notifications of people.
Yes, for some reason, talking about Die Hard and Christmas movie gets a lot of people riled up. It's
saying it wasn't is the problem.
But it's most definitely not a Christmas movie.
Didn't you manage to shoehorn it into like an Art Deco thing? Or something along those lines.
Because people were sort of saying, "Oh well, they say ho 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 in it," and at one point he's wearing a Christmas hat, and this. I sort of said, "Okay, fine, let's start making alternative explanations for Die Hard." So I think first I explained why it was a Western.
With the yippee-ki-yays.
Then I explained why it was a chick flick. I also believe I explained how it was an art house movie.
That was what I was thinking of.
I believe there was another one I came up with, but I can't think of it right now.
The art house explanation did earn my like. I'm going to admit that was rather.
I believe a certain daughter of Albion even claimed to have screen saved it.
I remember in
that regard. Yes.
Oh dear.
Revisionist. And
let me see. People
say I would love the British to try and convince people it's a silent movie.
A Charlie Chaplin-esque homage, you know.
I feel like he could do it well. I feel like he could manage it.
Yeah.
I feel like
the local deaf school.
I feel like British, you know, in addition to your usual fare, you should release a video where you go through the many reasons why Die Hard isn't a Christmas movie, and in a great show of irony, this video will be what catapults you to national and international acclaim and gives you your 300,000 subs plus that you desire,
and you'll probably get more downvotes than the YouTube video.
And you'll
I've got a feeling I might break the internet if I do that.
And you'll be so salty over the fact that your meaningful, you know, regular content has been superseded by the fact that you are now famous for the one thing you didn't want to be famous for.
Well, then again, I did once make a video. What was it? The 7 most annoying things about Americans, or something like that.
Oh yeah.
Which one also would think would be sort of terribly populist fare, which would kind of, earn one some easy hits. Instead, it just got me a lot of comments by disgruntled Americans who didn't seem to get the gag.
Well, I mean, shocker.
Americans not getting things? Surely not.
I might make a response video just so they like me more. Buy some friends.
Oh dear. Excuse me. The was it Discordia has given £2. Thank you very much. And said, I'm liking the Xmas hat, Mr. NSO. So thank you very much for that. Yes, my avatar now has a Christmas hat for a short period to be extra festive.
So you're now Mr. NSO, are you?
Well, it's shorthand, isn't it? It saves time.
Or you're about? Or is that? It's kind of an intermediary stage from not so obvious to NSO to ENSO.
Enso? What? I'm afraid this reference has gone over my head.
Moving on.
Some First World War. I don't know. He's something that only the Britisher knows, because he's the only one who was there at the time.
It was a small class of Spanish peasant who worked exclusively in a singular region during the 15th century, or something like that. And there you go.
Along those lines, yes.
I just
thought if you would try to say it as a word, the 3 letters, rather than pronounce them NSO, you would just go ENSO.
Well, as in Ferrari.
Which, yes, eventually would bring you to Enzo Ferrari. Yes.
I mean, I wouldn't balk at the idea of being associated with Enzo Ferrari, apart from the fact that I have no knowledge really of automobiles nor a desire to build them. So there's that.
Apparently, Discordia was being a typical Scot by saying that saved me buying more characters. So,
and also being a typical Scot by failing to realise that she did have 100 characters with which to play, and that she could definitely have written my entire name in there. But it's the spirit of the thing.
Yeah, apparently we are the more edgy and fun Radio 4, according to They Live Glasses in the chat.
Well, I would take that.
I will take that as well.
I would take that. Mogoot says, make the Britishers say, ho, 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 I've got a machine gun too.
Ho ho no.
And that's as close as you're going to get, I'm afraid.
Yes.
So what we need to do is we need to get Britisher at some point to say machine gun during the course of the evening. And then someone can clip it together and make it sound as if he has said this thing.
And then we'll make a remix out of it, and we'll have that rap track.
Oh yes. So what do you think about 20th century firearms, Britisher? Any particular favourites?
Well, I was just wondering, about the basically what makes the British British. Whether we might, in some way, want to segue back to that, the actual purpose of the stream.
As if fake accents has a purpose, man. I mean, come on. But okay, so if we go back to British values, it's like, how about this? British values are becoming less and less defined right now. And right now, there's only sort of a relatively defined culture. So people are acting out cultural norms instead of articulating it. And that seems sort of how it is. Compared to Americans, who are much louder and talk about their values more, we tend to act them out, but they're sort of unsayable.
Well, I mean, I think one of the things we can see when it comes to British values is when we've got things like government tests, which then basically try to define British values as democracy, fairness, and I don't know, civility or something like that.
Staunch opposition to racism.
And you sort of think, well, yeah, there just doesn't seem to be. There doesn't seem to be too much there. So, in a way, what makes the British British is fairly indefinable. It's one of these things that you feel in your bones more than actually it being something easily definable. But there is definitely something there. So when we talk about fairness, there is actually something within the British spirit that is very much geared towards fairness. So even though every other nation on earth would immediately embrace it, of course, as one of their values, but because we're all terribly, terribly fair-minded, there is actually something within the British that is uniquely geared toward fair play. And
the concept
towards not showing fair play.
The concept of fair play in and of itself, I think, is intrinsically a British axiom. I mean, when it came to even warfare, we had our rules of warfare, and then when things like the First World War, I think we were vocal proponents of the idea that, you can't do things like dip your bullets in excrement so that you can, even if you clip your enemy, they die of disease. We considered that to be not fair play, poor form.
Yeah, true. But then at the same time, we did build a giant flamethrower.
We did, and then we banned it afterwards when we realised what it did to people. But there you go. Win some, lose some. I didn't say the British were perfect. Okay?
I'm sure I remember reading in the Telegraph years ago that British fair play had been, I think the headline line was by science. I don't know what the content of that was, but something to do with how the British have a particular inclination for common good and being cooperative. Some people might call that docile, which is possible, but
well, how shall we say? There are certain quaint things about the British, which, again, I have heard people sort of say, "Oh, we do that too abroad." Well, no, you don't. And I'm saying this as someone who grew up abroad.
Okay.
When it comes to queuing at bus stops, that is something so terribly British.
Really?
Yes, it is really strange. So if you've got a bus stop anywhere else, it's basically everyone's waiting, and then as the bus approaches, pretty much everyone's in the starting blocks trying to position themselves correctly in order to be first through the door. Whereas with the British, it is that they form a queue basically randomly somewhere on a pavement where a bus will pull up at some point. And
That's true.
I doubt that there are any other people on the planet that do that.
And we become incensed if someone cuts in. Like, if I see someone do it to someone else, I feel incensed on their behalf, and I'll
Get to the back of the
But we
line.
No.
never say
That's much
anything,
too
right?
confrontational. What
Yeah, you
people
wouldn't
would
say
say would
anything.
excuse me.
Yes. And that's it.
Very loudly.
Oh, I couldn't even say it though. I wouldn't say it.
No, everyone was just like,
We've
and
got,
shame them by touching them to death.
Yeah, that's it.
I love how us espousing the sort of positives of British values has led to chat putting some really edgy comments
Oh,
to sort of
cheeky one.
say, fair play, we had an empire.
Well, that was fair play.
Yeah.
You know, if it wasn't us, it'd be somebody else, and we beat them fair and square.
In a war
Yes,
of
and
empires.
we had an empire, and that empire was, as you said, fairly benign.
It was comparably.
Comparably.
You know, if you compare it to, say, the Spanish Empire, that just basically took all the native population of South America and Central America and just basically used them to work mines or do whatever else they wanted.
Indeed.
I'm sorry, but the British did not behave in that way.
And the Ottomans.
And the Ottomans, yes.
The Mongol Empire. Yep. Rough as rats.
So, you know, give us some credit. And you know, one of the ways in which empires expand is not merely by just going out there and grabbing what you can get. To a certain extent, it is also foes that are dumb enough to attack you, and then you defeat them and take over their territory.
Mm.
And that is one of the ways in which empires expand that is often forgotten.
Exactly. I agree.
Well, the way that I would describe British values is the fact that we can knock 7 shades out of each other after a heavy night's drinking, but then be best friends as soon as we'd fit.
I've had so many nights.
Yep.
Yeah.
A cup of tea.
Yeah.
A couple of things like that.
Yeah.
People are saying, how long will it take us to hit peak fairness? British values include being a minority in your own capital city.
Yeah, I would say that we're sort of, there's fair play, but we are quite docile. I remember reading, I think I've probably said this before, that the British were the most likely to die choking because the idea of having to draw attention to yourself would be too inconvenient for other people in the restaurant.
Well, I would put it like this: that we are one of those forces you don't want to rouse, because once you have roused us, we basically will go to the absolute bitter bloody end.
I think, well,
as various other cultures realized. But one of the things is that it's extremely difficult to actually get us to get going, so to speak.
And with that comes also the fact that we are very sarcastic and very self-deprecating when it comes to ourselves. So because our humor is such that we take the mick out of one another on an almost constant basis, or we certainly used to, and even our military was defined by our gallows humor, so much so that other militaries picked up on it, and great stories about our attitude in warfare
wasn't there that wonderful incident in the Korean War where the Chinese were launching one of their main assaults, and the Allies were trying to hold the line. So the American commander realized that the British were taking a pounding, that they were really having enormous amounts of North Korean and Chinese coming at them. So he kind of called down the line to the hill where the British were on and asked, well, you know, how are things going down there?
Yes.
And the British commander replied, yeah, things are getting a bit sticky around here. Which the American basically just took to mean, oh, well, you know, they're managing. And therefore the Americans never sent reinforcements. While the British were actually waiting for the Americans to come.
Oh, really?
It was all down to the fact that sort of stiff upper lip communication by the British had completely befuddled the Americans into thinking, oh, well, you know, if there would be a problem, they would have told us.
Yes. But of course they don't click. There's a great book by a chap called Max Arthur called Last of the Few. Are you aware of it?
No.
But it's basically the Battle of Britain in the words of the pilots, and it's a load of In fact, it's not just the pilots, but it's also the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, and some of the engineers as well, and basically it's a load of excerpts from their stories, a lot of personal diaries from famous and non-famous alike, and the sort of things that they did. So one of the stories is about how there were this one squadron and there were 3 of them left from the 30 that they had originally been, and they were sent up into the sky and told that there was a group of around 80 Luftwaffe coming, and they would have to deal with them. They got to the area where the Luftwaffe were, and they'd been misinformed, and it was not 80 Luftwaffe but 800. Okay, so there's 3 aircraft against 800, and so the leader of the group said, "Usual plan, boys, surround them." and that encapsulates the British spirit perfectly,
quite charming.
in just a word. I mean, it's a really, really good book, and
I have to look it up.
it's a perfect Christmas present if you're after one.
You do realise that in this day and age, it would be a different line.
What would the line be in this day and age?
One of them would speak into the airwaves, saying the immortal lines, "I have a cunning plan."
Oh dear. But
what's the name of the book, Chip?
It's Last of the Few by Max Arthur. And as I say, it's got really good sort of stories in there. Some of them are quite tearful, but as I say, great Christmas present, and that's my shill. I'm not sponsored by Max at all, so. But, it's a really good, like the classic British understatement and making the best of a bad situation. I really, or not. It's not necessarily making the best of a bad situation, because a lot of cultures do that, but it defines the British in the way we approach it with wit, I suppose. With this idea that, as ridiculous as it is, we'll make a ridiculous statement just because.
Well, that's one of the things that befuddled the Germans, wasn't it, in the Second World War? That basically they expected all the British to be miserable POWs. And yet the British were constantly cracking jokes of some sort.
And singing, yes.
And it was just one of those things that they couldn't quite wrap their heads around it. And of course, there was also the famous incident, wasn't there, with P.G. Wodehouse, who was in the south of France at the time when the Germans invaded, and he ended up a prisoner of the Germans. And the Germans had this kind of idea of, well, we'll invite him to be on German radio, but that would be the German long-wave radio that was broadcast so that the Americans could listen in.
Yeah.
And of course, at that time, the Germans were very keen to kind of paint a happy picture to the Americans in order to kind of make the Americans think twice about joining the war.
Yes.
And yes, I think the scripts that P.G. Wodehouse wrote for those particular broadcasts, some of them I think are still out there, and the touch of the man was just phenomenal. He was taking the mickey out of the Germans mercilessly without the Germans even realizing.
Strong.
The
power of the British to administer underhanded compliance. Right. It's like, oh dear, that dress looks nice on you. You could do. Let me see. There's some people who've come up with some interesting things in chat, and I really I don't want to miss them, because there's some great things in here. So, British Value 3: swear at footballers and then act monumentally shocked, hurt, and offended when they swear back. Object of Hate saying, during the Falklands War, yes, I know this story actually. The Fleet Air Arm, so it's the Navy pilots, not the Flight Air Arm as we've put here. They described the overwhelming Argentine Air Force as a target-heavy environment. that's right on to that. I think being British is about knowing you're superior but being too modest to say so.
True.
Unless you're the Britisher, in which case you espouse your British superiority.
We don't need to because we don't have an inferiority complex like many other cultures.
Very true. Very true. British value for curry. I do admire the fact that we have managed to invent our own curry dish in the form of the tikka masala, and then and people just are unaware that it doesn't actually stem from India in a lot of cases.
I didn't know that either.
Stems from Glasgow.
In fact, well, I think there is a kind of there are several claims. I think one claim is Birmingham. One claim so there seems to be several claims for being the place of origin of the tikka masala.
Oh, go on then, tell feature.
I think also is it the Balti? Where it's actually in a where it's served in a kind of a metal bucket. I think that is also supposedly something that came about in Britain. And once again, there are several places that claim to have been the place that invented it.
Was it something to do with tomato soup? Campbell's tomato soup? No?
I don't think so. But I love the Wikipedia page for chicken tikka masala. It says place of origin, Indian subcontinent or Scotland.
I love it. Joan Everton talking more about British sort of attitude to other nations, saying, "We buried the bodies of the enemy's dead during the war. No one else did this. We are almost a moral compass for other nations. I think we've earned that." This is very true. Like one of the things you'll notice if you ever go to Normandy is and you visit the graveyards. So I visited both the American graveyards and the British graveyards when I walked the beaches there. And the Americans only buried the Americans. And I mean, the whole thing was a tourist attraction anyway. And the British, there is a plot next to where the British died, where they've buried the officers, certainly, of the Germans who died. And whereas the German foot soldiers were sent back to Germany, if they could be, and if not, buried there. But yes, we buried our enemies dead because we recognized that, one, many of them didn't actually want to be there, and secondly, that respect for the dead should be something which we kept, even if no one else did.
Well, there's also a story in the First World War, isn't there, when Richthofen eventually died. I mean, he was shot down, and there's all sorts of talk. One isn't quite sure whether he was shot down from the ground or whether another pilot shot him down. But eventually he landed badly wounded in whatever was the closest field, and then basically passed away in the plane. And as it was, he was then in a British sector. So the British buried him with full military honours. But the grave was then vandalised by locals. And the British commander kind of sent message to the local villages, as in, we're not having this.
Yeah.
And then they basically set the grave back to rights again, and just basically informed everybody, look, if you touch this grave, you'll be in serious trouble with us. And it was kind of seen as sort of, again, one of these kind of uniquely British things that we stood up for the fallen enemy.
Interesting.
Protagonist mentions that we did our most famous cultural export is death camps, and we're actually very warlike behind a veneer of posh accents and tea. This is an argument I hear like from one of my friends who's a South African, who points out that the first concentration camps were in South Africa, and we did make them.
Yes, we created the concentration camp, but it is somewhat disingenuous to kind of compare them with the concentration camps as we think of them in the 20th century.
Do go on.
Well, as such, if you think of it, what does concentration camp mean? It means where you concentrate a populace. So basically, what what happened is once the Boer War went into its second phase, so to speak, the Boers then operated as guerrillas. And the British troops found it incredibly difficult to come to terms with that. You know, you were fighting in wide open countryside with, you know, vast distances. And what the Boers effectively were doing is going from farmstead to farmstead. So effectively what the British did in order to overcome the enemy eventually was to remove the populations from their farmsteads and concentrate them in concentration camps. So that's where the name came from, to concentrate the population in those camps. What happened then was that diseases broke out in those camps. And that's why in some of those camps, the death rates were enormous. But there had never been the intention to do those people any harm.
So they weren't extermination
No,
camps?
these were not extermination camps that we kind of think of when we think of concentration camps in the Second World War and things like that.
So now we know why.
And the British population was very outraged when they heard of it, and significant changes were then made, and then thereafter the death rate, you know, dropped incredibly. So thereafter, not a lot of more people died in those camps, but it was kind of an unintended consequence that when you concentrate people into a tight space, if you then get diseases, then a lot of people die. So if you then get cholera and things like that, then it really runs out of control. But it had never been the intention of the British to see these people killed.
So now we know that the British's transformation post-monetization to full-blown communist is complete. Making apologies for.
I never meant to.
I never meant
I am the
that.
Gulag apologist. Yes.
Those weren't real concentration camps. They weren't real extermination camps.
I didn't mean to cause the famine.
Well,
Yes.
no. I mean, you can see, you know, you can see how the word for the camp itself came about. It was to concentrate the population in there in order to deny the Boers the support they had as they were wandering about the countryside on horseback.
Yes, the idea that we tried to make things better once we realised how much we were messing up that's one of those things. But to get away from, I guess, sort of the war and the empire as a sort of basis for Britishness, Liberal Zardos makes a good point, saying all this war stuff is all well and good, but what about our great literature? You know, that sort of history. Shakespeare, Wordsworth, Shelley, Orwell, Byron, and of course Benny Hill, the governor. That sort of thing. So obviously,
I'm happy that he left the greatest for last.
So this is more, I suppose, Sarah's avenue, because you have a great love of literature and the like. Does anything stand out to you that comes across as quintessentially British when it comes to literature? That's a no, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, I would go with language. That we have an incredible language.
She's dropped out. That's why she didn't answer.
I would say we have an incredible language. I remember, what was the chap who did the South Bank show, whose name, as usual, eludes me.
Not Mervyn Smith, is it?
Sorry?
I have in my head Mervyn somebody who did the South Bank show.
Yes, I think you could be right, but
Smith,
still no further.
Mervyn Smith. Melvyn Bragg.
Melvyn Bragg, that's the one. Yes, and I remember reading a book of his once about the English language, and he basically went about the different influences that English has had, because obviously it's such a kind of bastardized language. There are so many different influences that come into it, and in that regard, it's given us an enormous amount of options within the language itself that other languages simply don't have. So hide, you know, basically animal skin, hide. That is basically, in German, that is Haut, which is just skin. So basically, human skin is also haut. But what we have is we have the Anglo-Saxon, the Germanic word haut, which in our language becomes hide. But we've also got the Scandinavian Viking word skeen, which then becomes skin. So it then gives us choices in our language that most other languages don't have. And of course, that gives authors, and particularly poets and whatever, a lot more to play with. So it is our language really is a kind of a powerhouse compared to most other languages. I mean, I think Chinese, you know, the genius of Chinese is basically to have an alphabet that basically connects several different languages by basically each symbol having its own meaning. So it has the same meaning, even though the words for it in the different languages are, of course, different. So that's the genius of their language, how they solved that problem. I believe the supposedly most perfect language is German, which is, of course, why it is so difficult to make double entendres and things in German, because it's such a precise language that if you express yourself correctly, you cannot really be misunderstood, which takes away that ability for humor, which some people kind of say, well, you know, might be the cause of certain views about the Germans. But when it comes to the language that has the greatest vocabulary and whatever, and that is not just due to most technical, you know, new technical inventions now having English names, but already prior to that, the one with the greatest amount of verbiage, so to speak, is English. And that grants us, of course, a kind of a much bigger doll's house to play around in, if you know what I mean.
Mistress Crimson does point out the Japanese have 3 alphabets.
Well, they would, wouldn't they?
Show off.
Oh, you've made it back! Congratulations, Sarah.
My battery went so.
I assumed as much. Before you left abruptly, we were saying that we were going back into the British literary tradition, and so I was trying to ask you whether or not anything particular about the British literary tradition stood out to you as sort of quintessentially British, seeing as it is your area of expertise.
Well, I think that what you can see in British literature very pertinently is how, I suppose, before the commodification of travel, and particularly
and she's gone again. Yeah, that is unfortunate.
Well, it's your own fault for putting her on the spot.
I know. I will put up 2. I will read out the 2 super chats in the meanwhile and see if she makes it back. But so Skoen has written something in Russian, which I could attempt to pronounce in Russian, but I will not, because I will butcher that. But he basically says, Britisher equals indestructible union of the republics of the great free Russia forever. Long live the united, powerful Soviet Union created by the will of the people? ? Please, nobody clip me saying that. And that sort of thing. So that's you clearly conforming to Soviet communism now. And we also have...
well, I mean, I do like Ivan Rebrov, so I must be guilty of that.
And JS says the Beatles, referring to a cultural phenomenon from Britain, and sort of pop music in general being a part of the British tradition.
Well, pop music and pop culture, I think, is something that we have kind of embraced rather annoyingly.
Yes, with little things that will stay with us forever, like the gap-toothed Rimmel London girl, as sort of a cultural icon of like the 90s and stuff like that. Or not icon, I suppose, just one of those irritating things.
I'm not even sure if she's 90s. I think wasn't she just basically the 2000s?
Oh, maybe. I can't remember
the pretend Twiggy of the 2000s. Yes.
Oh dear.
Was that a cultural?
So Scone says Ivan
Showing your
Rebrov
age.
was a German.
Sorry, Ivan Rebrov was a German. Yes.
Yes.
You see, it's a very interesting story, Ivan Rebrov. Please stop me if I've told this before. I have a habit of sometimes repeating myself, as we have established on previous streams.
I shall load the shop.
Ivan Rebrov, I believe, was a plumber in Germany. Now, clearly, he was taking singing lessons, because you don't become quite such a talent if you haven't had any lessons whatsoever. But his singing instructor kind of told him, "I think you've got a talent for Russian song," because obviously they must have tried different spheres of music, and he basically embraced it wholeheartedly. So he didn't just kind of stand on stage and sing. No. He arrived in the full Cossack dress, including fur hat and everything. The thing with him was he became better than the Russians at it. He became an international star singing Russian folk song. Now, I believe he also did things like Fiddler on the Rooftop and things like that once he had become famous, if you know what I mean. Because he had that sort of voice like the one of Topol in Fiddler of the Rooftop. But he remained world-renowned for his Russian folk singing. I mean, if you look up, what is it, Ivan Rebrov, and I think it's Black Eyes, which is Ochi Chornya, and it's staggering. I mean, you realize that there's so much going on in that voice; it's unreal. And what was so special about it was when eventually the Iron Curtain fell, when Gorbachev came to power, he invited Rebrov to Russia, and he gave Rebrov an honorary Russian citizenship. Because he said, look, you have throughout the period of time of the entire Cold War, you have been the only positive image of Russia that the West has seen.
No.
I mean, you know yourself, every film villain had a Russian accent. So during that time,
yes, much like every
the only kind of Western origin positive image of a Russian was that of Ivan Rebrov.
Do you think that there's a this must be a causal factor that whoever is the predominant film villain of the time ends up being regarded by the world as the most villainous? So we've had the German, we've had the Russian, and now most film villains have a British accent, and so therefore we must be demonized.
I don't think it's that. I honestly don't think it's that. I think it's.
Well, I wasn't really an honest question, but go on.
I think it's actually that. And this, I remember saying this once on a stream with Undoomed, and he immediately, of course, pounced and said, "Oh yes, I'm not at all up myself, am I?" But I think what it is to American ears, the British accent sounds clever. It sounds intelligent.
It does.
And of course, what is more frightening than an intelligent enemy? Someone who has got the brain power to scheme, if you know what I mean. So I think that's why they tend to go for their British villains. And to a certain extent, I think the German accent had something similar going on.
Well, they sounded schemy when speaking English.
yeah. Whether it was the same thing with the Russians, or whether that really was just, oh well, they're the bad guys because they're our global enemy. I don't know.
It's also because they sound impressive, the Russians. I mean,
they
any of them. If you have a strong Russian accent, saying
especially if
KGB.
it's someone like Garry Kasparov staring at you from the other side of the chessboard. Yes.
Someone, of course, saying villains asterisk competent asterisk. Like as if this is a thing.
For a moment there, I thought that was an Asterix reference.
No, sadly not. You can keep that one in your box for the time being. But that's that. I'm going to round us off in about 5 minutes, but I am going to bring one small announcement. So, aside from the fact that I'm going to shill to the 214 of you here that I have a new video which is going to be uploaded directly after this stream on the Jordan Peterson phenomenon, I also have I've decided I'm not going to set up a subscribe star in the wake of this whole Patreon debacle, because Peterson and Rubin are going to, hopefully in good time, release an alternative.
They've announced that they're going to do something, but we don't
Yes.
quite know what that is.
Because Peterson's been developing a platform for the past year or so, and he has part of it, and he thinks it can be adapted so that it can take payments and stuff like that. The trouble I find with Subscribestar and the Patreon thing is all that I see happening with Subscribestar is a little bit later down the line, the payment processors will all have pulled out of there, because it'll be a hub, or GoDaddy or whatever it is will have decided that they're no longer going to host the platform because of the nature of the people who it's supporting.
Shall I be the voice? Shall I be the voice of utter cynicism?
Go for it.
I think to a certain extent that is going to happen anyway.
I do.
I think not just with Subscribestar, I think with any other alternative. I think eventually you will end up doing nothing but hopping from one provider to another anyway. Because, yes, I think the system has it in for them. And I think the main drivers, I very much suspect, are more than likely the credit card companies.
Yes, so Visa and MasterCard. So this idea, so I'm sort of sitting on it at the moment. I understand if you don't want to support me on Patreon anymore because you don't want to do that. I may set up some alternative accounts that I have multiple running at once. So those of you who do want to support me can, in the manner which you so choose. But I'm not going to be moving exclusively to Subscribestar, for instance. I might set up a PO box and people can send me tea and stuff like that, and sort of moral solidarity. After I do have someone who wants to send us Tregothan tea, Britisher, so there's that. But yes, I think I'm going to round us off there. It's been about an hour and a half, which is about the right time, I think. I believe we're no closer really to identifying British values, but it was an interesting conversation, and I think we've highlighted some aspects of Britishness itself anyway, and that side of things. So it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for joining me, Britisher and Tailed Feature. Thank you very much.
It's been an honor.
Thank you.
That's right. I believe I'm going to take a week off from YouTube next week. I may have some videos out this week to sort of tide us over, but I won't be running Fake Accents next week because of Christmas. And then we'll see you back in January then, presumably, or in New Year's. So there's that. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care and good night.